She was weighing fish with rough, blood-stained hands when a black car stopped beside her. A man in a suit stepped out and unfolded a sketch of her face. "A billionaire's last request was to find you," he said. She had never met a billionaire. She barely earned enough to survive. So why had the richest man in the country spent his final breath searching for her? But to understand how a poor woman selling catfish became the last thought of a dying billionaire, we have to go back to a morning that began like every other morning and ended with everything she thought she knew catching fire. Her name was Efua Eze, and for as long as anyone in Ogba Market could remember, she had sold fish from the same wooden stall near the gutter. She woke before the roosters. She carried her buckets on her head down the muddy road while the town still slept. She was 34 years old, and she owned 2 wrappers, 1 pair of slippers, and a small carved wooden fish that hung on a string around her neck. That little wooden fish was the only thing her mother had left her before she died, and Efua had promised never to take it off. She did not yet know that the same small object would one day shake an entire empire. Efua was not raising her own child. She was raising her late sister's son, a quiet boy named Obina, who was 9 years old and loved by the whole market. People pitied her, but they also respected her because she never begged and she never complained. When the other women gossiped about who was marrying who and whose husband had taken a second wife, Efua only smiled and kept scaling her fish. "A woman with no husband and no money," they whispered. "What kind of future is that?" What none of them knew was that her future was already speeding toward her in a black car with tinted windows. That morning, when the suited man showed her the sketch, Efua laughed in his face. "Olga, you have the wrong person," she said, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "Do I look like someone a rich man would know?" But the man did not laugh. He simply held the drawing higher, and when Efua looked again, her laughter died in her throat. Because the face on that paper was her face, the same wide eyes, the same small scar above the lip, but it had been drawn in ink that had already turned brown with age. It had been drawn long before she was born, and that was the first thing that did not make sense. "My name is Barrister Ndubuisi Okafor," he said gently. "People call me Ndu. I was the personal lawyer of Chief Emeka Obiora. 3 days ago, he died. Before he died, he made me swear on his hand that I would find the woman in this drawing." He paused. "Madame, that woman is you, and whatever you are running from, you cannot run from this." But Efua was not running from anything. At least, that is what she believed. So why did his words make her heart pound like a drum? Efua refused to go with him that day. She had fish to sell, a boy to feed, and no reason to trust a stranger in a fine suit. But that night, as she lay on her thin mattress listening to Obina breathe, she could not stop seeing that old brown sketch. How could a face drawn before her birth look exactly like hers? She fell asleep holding the little wooden fish, and she dreamed of a woman singing a lullaby she had never learned, but somehow always known. She would remember that dream later, when she finally understood what it meant. But by then, it would already be too late for the people who deserved to hear the truth. The next morning, everything changed. Efua arrived at the market to find her stall in ashes. Someone had burned it in the night. Her buckets, her scale, her small store of dried fish, all gone. And on the blackened wood, someone had written one word in white chalk: liar. The whole market gathered around her, murmuring, and for the first time in her life, Efua felt truly afraid. Because who burns the stall of a poor fish seller? And how did they know about the lawyer's visit when she had told no one? Barrister Ndu returned that afternoon, and this time Efua did not send him away. She stood in the ruins of her stall with Obina's hand in hers, and she asked him the only question that mattered. "What do these people want from me?" she said. Ndu looked at the ashes, then at her frightened face, and he made a decision that would cost him more than he could imagine. "Come with me to the city," he quietly said. "You are not safe here anymore, and I think the answer to your question is buried inside a family that would kill to keep it hidden." She should have run. Instead, she took Obina's hand and followed him, and that was the moment the trap truly closed.
The city was another world. Efua had never seen buildings so tall they seemed to scratch the sky, or roads so smooth they looked wet. But nothing prepared her for the Obura estate. When the gates opened, she saw a white mansion the size of a village with fountains and gardeners and a fleet of cars parked in a row like soldiers. The convoy of black jeeps rolled up the long driveway and uniformed staff lined the steps, staring at the barefoot fish seller as though a ghost had walked in from the dead. Efua clutched her wooden fish and felt every eye judging her. She did not know that inside those walls, a woman was already planning to destroy her. But she would learn that name very soon. Nneka Obura, the widow. They gathered in a great hall for the reading of the will. Chief Emeka's family sat in tall chairs, his widow, Nneka, cold and beautiful in black lace, and his only son, Chidi, a hard-faced man in his 30s who would not even look at Efua. The lawyer read the will slowly. Most of the fortune went to the family, as expected. But then came the line that made the whole room fall silent. "To the woman in the drawing I entrusted to my lawyer," the will said, "I leave 40% of everything I own, and I beg my family to forgive me." 40%. Efua did not even understand how much money that was. But she saw the widow's hands close into fists, and she understood one thing clearly. She had just made a very powerful enemy. That night, unable to sleep in the strange, soft bed, Efua wandered the mansion's long halls and found herself in front of a giant oil painting of Chief Emeka. She had never seen his face before. He was old and stern, and his eyes seemed to follow her. "Old man," she whispered to the painting, "why did you do this to me? I never knew you." And as she turned to leave, she saw something that stopped her heart. In the corner of the frame, a small photograph had been tucked, half hidden. It was a picture of a young woman, and the young woman was holding a carved wooden fish exactly like the one around Efua's neck. Who was she? And why did the richest man in the country keep her picture hidden for a lifetime? Efua took the photograph to Barrister Ndu the next morning, her hands shaking. Ndu studied it for a long time, and slowly his face changed. "Efua," he said carefully, "I do not think Chief Emeka was looking for you." He turned the old sketch and the photograph side by side. "Look at the paper. Look how old it is. This drawing was made almost 40 years ago." He looked up at her. "The woman he told me to find, I think she is not you. I think you only look like her, and I think you have her wooden fish and her eyes because you are her blood." Efua felt the ground move beneath her. "Then who is she?" Ndu had no answer yet, but somewhere in that mansion, a very old woman did. The answer came from the most unexpected place. Among the estate's cooks was a half-blind grandmother named Mama Nkechi, who had worked for the Oburas for 40 years. When Efua passed through the kitchen humming under her breath, humming the lullaby from her dreams, the old woman dropped the pot she was holding. "That song," that old woman gasped, groping toward Efua with trembling hands. "Where did you hear that song? Only one woman in this world ever sang that song." Efua froze. "My mother used to hum it to me before she died." The old woman's blind eyes filled with tears. "Then your mother," she whispered, "was Adiaze, and Adiaze was supposed to be dead for 30 years. That was the first thing Efua had never seen coming. The face in the sketch was not hers, it was her mother's. A mother she had known only as a quiet, poor woman who sold fish and sang a strange lullaby. A woman who had died when Efua was 15 without ever explaining where she came from. And now, a dying billionaire had drawn that same face and begged his lawyer to find her. What had Adiaze been to Chief Emeka? And why had she spent her whole life hiding in a fishing town, pretending to be nobody? Efua needed answers, but the people who held those answers had every reason to bury them forever. Barrister Ndu began to dig. He was a careful man, an honest man, the kind who had never taken a bribe in his life, which was exactly why the powerful had always kept him at a distance. He pulled old records from dusty government offices. He bribed a clerk to open a sealed file, and what he found made his hands go cold. The Obiora Empire, the factories, the oil blocks, the towers, had all grown from a single invention registered 40 years ago, a special fish preservation formula that had made the family their first millions. But the patent had not been filed by Emeka Obiora. It had been filed by a young chemist named Adiaze. Ifua's mother had not been nobody. She had been the woman who built the foundation of the entire empire before someone stole it from her. When Ndu told Ifua she did not feel rich, she felt sick. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that everything these people have, they took from my mother?" Ndu nodded grimly. "And I think that is why the chief left you 40%. Guilt. He spent his whole life trying to find her, and when he was dying, he tried to make it right." Ifua stared at her rough, scarred hands, the hands of a fish seller, just like her mother's. All those years of poverty, all those cold mornings by the gutter, and all that time a fortune built on her mother's brilliance had been sitting in a white mansion across the country. "I want to know who did it," she said, her voice like stone. "I want to know who stole my mother's life." But some questions are dangerous to ask out loud in the wrong house. Because someone had been listening. That evening, as Ifua walked back toward her room, Chidi Obiora blocked her path in the dark hallway. Up close, the son's eyes were red like a man who had not slept in days. "You need to leave this house tonight," he said, his voice low and shaking. "Take whatever you want, take money, but go, and never come back." Ifua lifted her chin. "Why? Because you are afraid I will take what belongs to your family?" Chidi laughed, a broken, bitter laugh. "You think this is about money?" he said. "You have no idea what you are standing in the middle of." And before she could answer, he walked away, leaving her with a new question that would not let her sleep. If it was not about the money, then what was it about? Ifua did the only thing she could. She began to fight quietly. She copied the documents Ndu found and hid them inside the lining of her wrapper. She befriended Mama Nkechi and sat with her every night, drawing out old memories one careful thread at a time. And she kept the little wooden fish tucked beneath her clothes, close to her heart, because she was starting to believe it meant far more than she had ever known. She was a poor woman in a nest of powerful enemies, but she was not helpless. She was patient, and she was watching. What she did not know was that the person she trusted most had already sold her out. Barrister Kalu had arranged for a DNA test, proof, he said, that would confirm Ifua was truly Adaeze's daughter and secure her inheritance forever. "Once the test is done, no one can call you a liar," he promised, patting her hand. Ifua wept with gratitude. She gave her sample and waited, full of hope, for the truth to finally set her free. But when the results came back a week later, they were read aloud in a packed courthouse, and they said Ifua Eze had no connection to Adaeze at all. The judge frowned, the widow smiled, and Ifua stood there, publicly branded a fraud, a common villager who had tried to steal a dead man's fortune. How could the test be wrong when she knew who she was? The answer was standing right beside her, still holding her hand. The humiliation was total. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, shouting that the fish seller fraudster had been exposed. Someone threw a rotten tomato that struck Ifua on the shoulder. The crowd jeered. And through it all, Barrister Kalu kept his arm around her, whispering, "Be strong, my daughter," while the cameras drank in her shame. Ifua had never felt so small in her life. She wanted to disappear into the ground. But as she was pulled through the mob, she caught sight of Chidi standing apart from the crowd, watching her with an expression that was not triumph. It looked strangely like grief. Why would her enemy grieve for her ruin? That night, back at a cheap motel where Ndu had hidden her and Obina, Ifua broke down at last. "They have won," she wept. "The whole country thinks I'm a thief. I have nothing left." Ndu knelt in front of her, and for the first time, he took her hand not as a lawyer, but as a man who had come to care for her. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "I have watched you these weeks.
You are the bravest person I have ever met, and I do not believe that test. Edayaze's blood is in you. I have seen it in your face, in your hands, in that song." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "We are not finished, I swear it." It was not a grand romance. It was just two tired people holding on to each other in a dark room. But something real had begun, and it would soon put both their lives in danger. For a few quiet days in that small motel room, they almost forgot the war around them. Ndu bought Obina a football, and in the evenings the three of them ate rice from the same pot and laughed at nothing, the way real families do. "Why are you helping me?" Efua asked him one night as the boys slept between them. "You have lost clients. You are risking everything. For a fish seller you did not know a month ago." Ndu was quiet for a long time. "My mother sold Gari by a roadside to send me to law school. She died before she saw me become a barrister. When I look at you, I see her." He looked away, ashamed of how much he had revealed. "I could not save my mother, but I can fight for you." Efua said nothing. She only reached out and held his hand in the dark, and for the first time in weeks she let herself hope. But hope, in that house, was the most dangerous thing of all. Ndu went back to the laboratory that had run the test. He was an honest man, and honest men notice small things. He noticed that the sample had been logged by a technician who had suddenly resigned and left the country. He noticed that the chain of custody had a 2-hour gap, and when he pulled the security footage, quietly, carefully, he saw a familiar round-faced man entering the lab that night, carrying a small cooler. Barrister Kalu. The man who had held Efua's hand and called her his daughter had swapped her sample and faked the results. The trusted ally had been the enemy all along. But why would a family lawyer go so far to destroy a poor woman? Ndu was about to learn that Kalu was following orders from someone far more dangerous. Ndu confronted Kalu in his office that very night. "You know what you did at the lab," he said, dropping a printed photo on the desk. Kalu did not even flinch. He simply leaned back and smiled a tired, ugly smile. "You are a good lawyer, Ndubisi, but you are a fool. Do you know how many men tried to help Edeyaze 40 years ago? They are all dead or ruined. This family does not lose." He leaned forward. "Drop it. Take the girl and vanish, or you both will end up like her mother." Ndu's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, like her mother? How did Edeyaze die?" But Kalu only smiled and said, "Ask the fire." And in that moment, Ndu realized that Edeyaze's death had never been an accident at all. Ndu raced back to the motel, but he was already too late. The room was empty. Efua and Obina were gone. On the bed lay the little wooden fish on its broken string, and beside it a note in elegant handwriting. "If you want to see them alive, come alone to the estate. Bring the documents. Tell no one." Ndu's hands shook.
The widow had taken the one person he loved and the boy she was raising, and she had used the one thing Efua would never willingly leave behind, her mother's necklace, to prove it. He had a choice: go to the police, who were half in the widow's pocket, and risk Efua's life, or walk alone into the lion's den with the only evidence they had. He grabbed the wooden fish and he ran to his car. But what he did not know was that the widow wanted the documents for one reason only: to burn them, as she had burned everything else. At the estate, Efua sat in a locked room with Obinna clutched to her chest, and for the first time she came face to face with Nneka Obiora alone. And here the story turned again, because the widow did not gloat like a heartless stranger. She sat down slowly, an old woman suddenly looking every one of her years, and she spoke in a voice full of 40 years of pain. "You have her face," Nneka said quietly. "Do you know what it's like to marry a man, to bear his son, to run his home for 40 years, and to know that every single night he was dreaming of another woman?" Efua said nothing. "Emeka never loved me," the widow whispered. "He loved Edayaze. Even in his sleep he called her name. Even dying, it was her he wanted to find, not me, her." For one terrible moment, Efua almost pitied her. And that was exactly when the widow's face turned to ice.
"But pity is a luxury for poor people," Nneka said, standing. "I came from nothing too. I clawed my way into this family, and I will not let a fish seller's daughter take it from me now." She had the documents Ndu would soon bring. She had a courtroom that had already branded Efua a liar. She had the money, the power, and the law. And she had something else. She had already given the order to have the old estate archive, where the last proof of Adaez's patent was stored, burned to the ground that very night. "By morning," she told Efua, "there will be nothing left, no proof, no patent, no mother, only a mad old man's guilt and a village thief." It truly looked like she had won, and for a long, sickening stretch, you would have been right to believe it. Ndu arrived with the documents and was seized at the gate. The widow took the file from his hands and with a small smile fed it page by page into a burning drum in the courtyard while he watched, helpless. Across the country, the archive went up in flames, and to finish it, Kalu filed papers that same night to have Ndu disbarred for tampering with court evidence, destroying his career and his voice in one stroke. By dawn, Efua had no proof, no lawyer, no reputation, and no necklace. Her mother's brilliance would be erased from history, and the family that stole it would keep everything. There was, it seemed, no way back. But the widow had made one small, arrogant mistake. She had forgotten about her own son, because Chidi Obiora had spent his whole life carrying a secret that was eating him alive. He was not cruel by nature. He had tried to warn Efua away because he knew what his mother was capable of, and because he was ashamed of a fortune he knew was stolen, ashamed of a father who chose guilt over courage, ashamed most of all of what his mother had done long ago. For years he had told himself it was loyalty. He had told himself that protecting his mother was protecting his family. But watching Efua, a woman with nothing, refuse to break, refuse to lie, refuse to run, something in Chidi finally cracked. And when he overheard his mother say the word fire with a smile on her lips, he understood at last that he had spent 40 years protecting a murderer. That was the night Chidi decided to burn it all down himself. Chief Emeka's public memorial was held 3 days later, and all the country came. It was a grand and terrible spectacle. 1,000 mourners in white, a cathedral of flowers, television cameras broadcasting live, and the widow, Nneka, seated at the front like a queen, her victory complete. Efua was there too,
released now that she was harmless, sitting at the very back among the servants, holding Obina's hand, allowed to attend only so the family could show the world how merciful they were. The bishop was in the middle of his eulogy when the great doors opened and Chidi Obiora walked down the aisle carrying a small metal box, and the whole cathedral went silent, because everyone could see that the dead man's son was crying. "Stop the service," Chidi said. His voice echoed through the speakers. His mother rose halfway from her seat, her face white. "Chidi, sit down," she hissed, but he did not sit down. He climbed the steps to the altar, set the metal box on his father's coffin, and turned to face the cameras and the crowd. "Chief Emeka asked to be forgiven in his will," Chidi said, his voice breaking. "Today I am going to tell you all what he needed forgiveness for, and what my mother did." Nneka was on her feet now, screaming for security, but the crowd blocked them, hungry for the truth. And Efua, at the back of the church, rose slowly to her feet, because she knew somehow that the last secret was about to be spoken aloud. Chidi opened the metal box. Inside lay two things. The first was a second carved wooden fish, the exact twin of the one Efua's mother had left her, its match, kept locked in Emeka's private safe for 40 years. He held it up for the cameras. "My father carved two of these," Chidi said, "one for himself and one for the woman he loved, Adaeze." Then he lifted out the original sketch, and on the back of it, in Emeka's own shaking hand, a written confession. And Chidi read it aloud, word by word, while the whole nation listened. What that letter revealed was the thing no one had seen coming. Not Efua, not Ndu, not even the widow herself had known that Emeka had written it all down.
"I, Emeka Obiora, confess before God," Chidi read. 40 years ago, I loved a woman named Adaeze, and she loved me. She was carrying my child. But I was a coward. My family arranged my marriage to Nneka for money, and I let them. When Nneka discovered that Adaeze was pregnant with my daughter, she went to Adaeze's laboratory in the night. There was a fire. Adaeze was believed dead. I took her formula. I built my empire on it, and I let the world forget her name. I did not know she survived. I did not know my daughter lived. May God forgive me. The child is my blood, and everything I own belongs to her. Chidi lowered the letter and looked straight at Efua across the silent church. Everything belongs to her, he repeated softly. To my sister. The cathedral erupted. Efua stood frozen at the back, the whole world spinning around her. She was not a fraud. She was not a stranger. She was Chief Emeka Obiora's own daughter, the hidden child of the woman whose genius had built the empire, the woman the widow had tried to kill in a fire 40 years ago and had tried to erase all over again. The lullaby, the wooden fish, the face in the sketch, it had all been leading here. And the widow Nneka, who had believed her son's shame would protect her forever, had made the one mistake that undid her. Her own arrogance handed her her enemy the sword. Nneka lunged for the letter, shrieking that it was a forgery, but the truth was already everywhere, on live television, in 1,000 phones, spoken in a dead man's hand and confirmed by his weeping son. And then came the final blow, from the smallest person in the room. Old, half-blind Mama Nkechi shuffled forward from among the servants, and the crowd parted for her. I was there that night, the old woman said, her voice thin but clear. I pulled Adaeze from the fire. I hid her. I helped her run, and I kept her secret for 30 years because she feared this family would finish what they started.
She pointed a trembling finger at the widow. "I watched you strike the match, Eneka. God has kept me alive just to say it out loud." And the last wall protecting the widow crumbled to dust. What happened next did not happen in a courtroom, and that was the surprise of it. The police did come, and Neka was arrested for the fire and the fraud, and Kalu was arrested beside her. But that is not how justice truly landed. Justice landed when the whole nation, watching live, turned against the woman who had stolen a poor chemist's life, when the Obiora name, which the widow had killed to protect, became a name of shame in every home in the country. She had done everything to guard her family's honor, and in the end, her own son had stripped it bare before the world. She had murdered to keep her place in the empire, and now the empire itself was being dismantled and given away. Her punishment was not just a prison cell. It was watching everything she killed for handed to the daughter of the woman she hated. And Efua Eze did something with it that no one expected. Because Efua Eze did not keep the empire. She stood in that great white mansion, now legally hers, 40% and more, and she felt nothing but the cold of it. "This house was built on my mother's death," she told Ndu quietly, standing before the giant painting of the father she never knew. "I do not want to live inside her grave." So she made her choice. She dissolved the Obiora Empire and rebuilt it under a new name, the Arayeze Foundation, restoring her mother's stolen patent to her mother's name at last, and using the fortune to build laboratories and schools for poor girls who were clever the way her mother had been clever, girls the world would have thrown away by a gutter. The richest inheritance in the country became a monument to the woman who had been erased, and her mother, at last, had her name back. Chitty was not spared, and he did not ask to be. He gave evidence against his own mother, and though the country never fully forgave him, Efua did. "You lost your family the day you told the truth, so let me be your family now." He wept in his sister's arms, the enemy who had become the reason justice was possible. And Barrister Ndu, disbarred for his honesty, was quietly reinstated when the truth came out, though he no longer cared much for courtrooms. He cared for a fish seller from Ogba Market and for the quiet boy she was raising, and slowly, without any grand words, the three of them became something like a home.
There was no big wedding, no convoy, no cameras. One quiet afternoon, Ndu simply took Efua's hand at the new fish stall and said, "Marry me. Not the rich woman, this one, the one with the bucket." Efua laughed until she cried. "You waited until I smelled a fish to ask me?" she said. "I waited until you were free," he answered. And the market women who had once whispered that she had no future now danced in the dusty road, singing her name. But even in that joy, Efua kept touching the wooden fish at her throat, because some part of her was still holding a conversation with the dead. On the last morning of this story, Efua took Obina back to the town where she was born. She did not go to the mansion or the foundation or the cameras that still followed her everywhere now. She went to the old market by the gutter, where a new fish stall had been built where her burned one used to stand. And there she tied the two carved wooden fish together on a single new string, her mother's and her father's, joined at last. And she hung them around her neck. Obina looked up at her and asked why she still came to a place like this, now that she was rich. Efua smiled and touched the two small fish resting against her heart. "Because this is where my mother taught me who I am, and no one can ever take that again." Then she picked up a bucket, and she went back to work. Not because she had to, but because, finally, she was free. And somewhere in a cold prison cell, an old woman who killed to protect a name sat listening to the whole country speak that name with love. The name Adaese, the one name she had spent her entire life trying to bury.
That, in the end, was her true punishment, and that was the justice no one saw coming.